What you have is, because we have Purdue Farms here in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, which was founded here, you have this idea of the chicken industry being ingrained in the culture. And so what that said, you have many people who work in the industry, you have people who have relatives that work in the industry, or you have many things that are sponsored by the industry. And so what you end up with is a lot of people who have a loyalty to the business for what it offers them and their families. And on the other side, you have a group of people that have issues with the industry and how out of control and inconsiderate, and more words that I can say, are, influencing areas, affecting communities, negatively impacting. It's a love and hate, if you will.
I'm Carly Rizzuto, and this is episode 4 of No Land Farms. The loyalty and love to the business that Monica, Delmarva organizer and president of the Wicomico County NAACP, just described is something that came up a lot in my interviews, especially with Rachel, who you met in episode 3. During our interview, Rachel and I made a short drive around Salisbury, where she lives, and we were able to see a feed mill, a hatchery, countless CAFOs, trucks of chickens in transport, a processing plant, and a billboard advertising jobs at the processing plants. We also saw the Frank P. Purdue School of Business, interestingly not the School of Agriculture, at Salisbury University, and the Arthur W. Purdue Stadium, home to the Delmarva Shorebirds baseball team. So it seems like really all parts of the industry are visible around town.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit more to the presence of the poultry industry here where you live in Salisbury?
Yeah, I think it's very known that this area is chronically smelly. It's very recognized that it's the Purdue plant, but it's also kind of looked at as the way of life and how things just kind of came to be. It's unfortunate because obviously Purdue is a massive corporation with a lot of money and a lot of political will, and so our community, the county fair, and a lot of our infrastructure, Purdue has a big hand in donating or sponsoring things, and so the perspective for a lot of community members can be twofold, where if you're directly impacted, you'll have a completely different experience on what it's like to live near Purdue or what it's like to live near a CAFO or the processing plant, where if you have a little bit of removal from it, many folks just view it as a very generous donator to the county fair or to the local, baseball G League venue.
So when the company is donating large portions of money to support the town, that tend to make people supportive of it, which can kind of obscure the other impacts from the pollutants coming from the facilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with the current PFAS contaminations and suits against Purdue, I think it does provide a little bit of cognitive dissonance and a little bit of a hardship for community members to fully grasp that there's a chance that this corporation that's been a staple and was born in Salisbury could be impacting their livelihood or even their health.
Maria, the executive director of the Sussex Health and Environmental Network, explained to me that the integrator's public image also comes from their relationships with local media and politicians.
They have great access, right, to the government and the officials, and they have a lot of power. So it was funny because an article came out yesterday, and you have no idea how many times it was sent to me by various people. The article's name is Millsboro Mayor Touts Mount Air During Minute Segment.
The article, which was published on November 11, 2024, quotes Millsboro's Mayor Kimberly Kahn at the November 4th Town Council meeting. During the meeting's Marvelous Millsboro Minute segment, Kahn said, quote, "Mount Air has a unique relationship with the town of Millsboro. They are a true corporate citizen, end quote. As reported by the article, Khan highlighted Mount Air's charity work, mentioning their donations to local food banks, giving money to create a training area for the fire department, an $80,000 donation to build a basketball court at the new police station, and donating free chicken for the sandwiches at the police station's recent basketball tournament. Khan told Mount Air, quote, "You are really taking care of our little corner of the world. You guys are everywhere," end quote. The director of Mount Air Cares, J.R. LaPearl, attended the town council meeting and responded, quote, "Thank you for the opportunity to be a small part of what happens here in town. We just love to give back, and we try to be faithful." Millsboro, by the way, is in Delaware's Sussex County, which has a welcome sign that reads, quote, "Welcome to Sussex County, your business partner."
You know what a company town is, right? That's basically what we are here. They're giving to the fire department, to the sports teams, and not that these aren't good things. These are good things, right? You want a good neighbor to be a part of the community, give to the food banks and do things like this. But you also want them to be a good neighbor to the neighbors who host their operations. Okay. So it's not okay that we have communities where there are multiple birth defects and no one can get clean water out of the tap. It's not okay that permit levels are not being met and everyone's looking the other way. So it has to be a true intention that the communities are respected, right? Because this is their neighborhood. These are their homes.
One Delmarva newspaper, Coastal Point, published 19 articles in 2024 that promoted Mount Air for a donation or a community service, and 3 articles that celebrated Delmarva's poultry history. The paper advertises how Mount Air is feeding hungry families on Easter and Thanksgiving, helping community cleanups on Earth Day, sponsoring music performances at an annual Father's Day event, and giving students scholarships. The money that big ag companies donate in their giving initiatives is a drop in the bucket compared to what they earn in annual profits and the PR and the power that they get in return. A positive public image provides them with a good reputation, which grants them local loyalty, which gives them influence over policymaking because local politicians want to share in that positive public image and bring in those corporate donations. They get money back from tax write-offs, they get business as usual, so that means increasing their scale and pollution and capital. While it doesn't always seem like it at first glance, it's nefarious work akin to corporate marketing tactics like rainbow washing when you see Raytheon at pride parades, or greenwashing like Exxon advertising their investment in algal biofuel and acting like it's meaningful climate action, which it's not, by the way.
And there's something that often people overlook. It's called the rural code, right? So, when you have someone and they have these articles where you see they're doing good things for the food bank, they're doing good things for, the kids' baseball teams, the food drives, they're a big employer. When you live in a rural area, all your neighbors. Everybody shops the same grocery store, everybody goes to the same church, and it is very unpopular to speak out against any kind of practices because it's looked at I can tell you 10 people that one works for the food bank and he's a big supporter, but he'll say, I can't put my name on that because they give to the food bank, right, where he has his big part in it. Or someone else who says, my daughter has to go in front of the county, so anything, she's worried she's going to lose her job because I'm speaking out. This is what you have a lot of. It's this rural code, and it puts people in a very sticky place if they try to speak up.
Right. So, by these large corporations, by concentrating their operations in one place and concentrating, their money, then too, you're in control of people's livelihoods, and then that prevents them from being able to speak out.
Yes, exactly. And it also, there's a lot of influence with even ag universities, land grant universities, funding, research. So there's a lot of different pressures. I've seen scientists get intimidated. things that you wouldn't think you see.
In the Inside Climate News article, Giant Chicken Houses Overrun Delmarva and Neighbors Fear It's Making Them Sick, Georgina Gustin writes, throughout the region, county boards are populated with grain growers and chicken house contractors, and state lawmakers have deep ties to agriculture. Charles Otto, who represents Somerset and Worcester counties in the Maryland House of Representatives, is also president of the Wicomico County Farm Bureau. Jacob Day, mayor of Salisbury, the commercial hub of the Eastern Shore, is the son of the CEO of Purdue, end quote. Jacob Day resigned as mayor in 2023, by the way, to take Maryland Governor Wes Moore's appointment to be Secretary of Housing and Community Development. Here's Gabby, a organizer and a founder of Concerned Citizens Against Industrial CAFOs, on how this corporate capture affects organizers.
I will say, over the years, we got painted as these anti-farmer, anti-chicken industry people, and it's a propaganda machine that it's hurtful, and it's unfortunate that it was laid out that way. I've never been anti-farmer. I've never been anti-chicken. The farmers that used to call me anonymously and we would speak about different issues, they knew that. But, we got a lot of hate, and we still do. Industries also need to be held accountable. And that's ultimately what kind of just stems into all of these different issues. And I will say, with the farmers, I wish that there was a way for them to feel safer and also more compelled to be able to speak up for themselves and fight for the things that they deserve.
Animal Ag has a long-held practice of intimidating and criminalizing whistleblowers, journalists, and activists. There's groups like the Animal Agriculture Alliance, dedicating large amounts of resources to tracking activists, especially animal rights groups, and reporting back to industry members. In February of 2024, a Tyson's Foods representative testified in favor of a Kentucky bill to prohibit not approved photography, video recording, and audio recording by drone or otherwise of food manufacturing, food processing, and animal feeding operations. The bill passed and joined a collection of legislation called Ag-Gag laws in states like Alabama, Iowa, Missouri, Montana, and North Dakota, functioning to intimidate whistleblowers and conceal food operations from the public. Since the passage of the 2006 Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, actions to expose abhorrent working conditions in food processing facilities or animal abuse in CAFOs can be prosecuted under a terrorism statute. These laws suppress public dissent, protect industries committing violence, and are part of a larger pattern of bills criminalizing protests and preventing systems change in the U.S. They also value property and profit over people and non-human life. Like Gabby said, speaking out can be really scary, especially for farmers. Impressively, Craig Watts from episode 2, he did just that. You're known as a whistleblower for industrial chicken production. I'm interested in hearing what happened leading up to your decision to whistleblow, if you think of it even as whistleblowing, too. What motivated you and how did you go about doing it?
I think the first time I was called an activist, I thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard in my life. I just don't really, I see myself more as an advocate or truth teller. I just don't, I'm not. Everybody has a point, right? When you hit that point where enough is enough. And it had been little things along the way. And the whole time I'm growing chickens for these 20-some years, I wasn't growing for 20-some years because it was so good. I was growing for 20-some years trying to get out of debt. So a lot of people get up every morning and go to jobs they hate because they have other obligations. And that's where I was. I just didn't really see any way out, but I started working with an organization here in North Carolina, and we were looking at really bringing in some regulations or protections for farmers that are under these contracts, trying to get the USDA to recognize there's issues out here. We need some protection, right? So through working with that organization, they sent us to organizational training, or I think that's what it was. And so my wife was with me. And we were sitting in a motel room in Brookings, South Dakota, and a Purdue commercial comes on television. And it's Jim Perdue, and he's talking about how great his dad said he treated his farmers or something like that. But he walks inside of a chicken house, and let me tell you, it was pristine. Everything was shiny. Everything was new. It looked like the stuff had been wiped down with Armor All. The bedding was brand new pine shavings on market age birds, which I can assure you it don't look like that at the end of a flock. The birds like had a half an acre a piece to roam around, and it's just not what I saw when I went to work, and that bothered me to no end because yes, I had a contract with Purdue, but at the end of the day, the consumer is my boss as a farmer. And I just felt like, okay, this is BS. We need to, I need to do something. And I didn't know what to do, to be honest with you. And I actually sat on that for a couple of years, just miserable. And I started working with a Reuters reporter on a story about antibiotics and chicken feed. And he introduced me to a lady who worked with Compassion World Farming, that was an animal welfare organization.
In 2014, Craig teamed up with Leah Garces, who is now the president of Mercy for Animals. Farm animals are not protected under the Animal Welfare Act because the law excludes farmed animals from the definition of animal. The USDA does not enforce the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act to prevent pain during slaughter for poultry, considers poultry exempt from the 28-hour law for better treatment during transport, and monitors poultry largely through industry-made food safety standards under the Poultry Products Inspection Act. This state-sanctioned disregard for animal life encourages the development of cruel industry practices in order to increase production for financial gains, like beak clipping, force feeding, and confinement into restrictive crates and cages within the poultry industry as a whole.
I just felt like that was my chance. If I knew animal welfare was a hot button, I didn't know if the sympathy for the farmer was on that level, but I felt like if we could kind of merge the two, that it would benefit both issues. Me being a farmer, bringing an animal rights person in would give her street cred with farmers, and vice versa. And I learned more about the animal welfare issues sitting on my living room floor with her in 10 minutes than I'd ever thought about in my previous 20 years. But then she also got a clear understanding of why farmers do what they do, because they can't afford to do it any other way. There's a lot of the reason. And the company dictates the rest of it. And so she came and brought her a lady who filmed with her, and we shot a 5-minute YouTube, and it got in the New York Times and then got up on the Reddit board, and it just went bananas. I don't know how many millions of views that video's gotten now, but to say that changed my life would be like the understatement of a lifetime. I mean, it like changed that day. So, but honestly, when I finally got that out there in that big of an arena, it felt like the world came off my shoulders.
Yeah, I was going to ask next, how did that feel?
Yeah, I mean, granted, I mean, I didn't have a plan B, and it created a lot more problems, and they were trying to make me as miserable as they could. I mean, they were coming out like 2 and 3 and 4 of them at the time, 2 and 3 and 4 times a week, and they trashed me in the press pretty good too. Maybe not Purdue specifically, but certainly the industry did. They sent that video to this AstroTurf group called like the Center for Food Integrity or some foolishness like that. And naturally, they said it was all the farmer's fault. Initially, it was he's a bad farmer. He's not following our protocols. Blah 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 blah. Though they send somebody out here once a week for 20-some years, how can I get around not following their protocols if they're sending somebody down here to basically check me out once a week, every week for every flock of chickens I've ever grown, right? So, and plus, I mean, I had so many top producing flocks, and then another gauge they use is called a 6-flock average, meaning how well you did over your previous 6 flocks, which probably is a much better indicator than just one flock here and there. And I was well above average there as well when I left. And so that argument just didn't hold water. So then it went from that to I staged it. And that really pissed me off. There's just not even 1/1,000,000th of an ounce of truth in that. Within a year, I exited the contract myself. I didn't wait on them to fire me.
Are you still dealing with any repercussions?
No, I just happened to be a contractor with Purdue. These issues aren't specific to Purdue. This is industry wide. I just happen to be a Purdue grower. No, this isn't about Craig versus Purdue at all anymore. That fight's in the courtroom.
Nowadays, Craig is still a farmer. He grows produce and has some goats, chickens, and ducks. But his day job is helping contract growers.
My day job and where I spend most of my time is working with the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project, where I head up what they call the Grower Transition Program, and we work with farmers on many issues. They may have issues with the loans, they may have issues with the contracts, bankruptcies, legal referrals. We really don't know when the phone rings what we're going to be facing, but we want to be that air traffic controller that can land them as soft as possible. Unfortunately, people still lose their farms, but we don't quit until every rock is flipped.
I also asked Rebecca, the Food and Water Watch Senior Food Policy Analyst from episode 2, what she thought of the relationship between the state and the industry and how that impacts people's cities and towns.
I think it's never been more clear than now that these kind of corporate cronies rotate their way through not only small towns, but through Congress and the administration. Yeah, these company takeovers of towns really hollow out communities. We know this from history as well, from coal, from fracking, and we see this with factory farms, that the impact is truly massive. We talk to people all the time where when these companies come into town, they really stomp out competition from Main Street businesses to local marts. Not only are we talking about the production level, but because these companies, we mentioned again, are some vertical integration as well. There goes your seed supplier. There goes your other Main Street business that fixes this one tool. And that has an impact on then the local groceries, and really kind of collapses down and hollows out rural communities and sends that money to Wall Street instead of keeping it within communities. So we actually, I know we're focused on Maryland, but we've got the parallels all over the country, and our organizers also work in Iowa, and it's kind of the heart, the belly of the beast, the hog capital of the world. We've got this one county with the most hog factory farm development, and since basically 1982, they've suffered declines across all these different economic indicators, including median household, total jobs, and they've also experienced huge depopulation, population decline in the county as well. And this is one of the biggest hog counties in the state. And we're seeing that this county, the one that's supposed to be, the road is painted in gold because of the hog industry, we're seeing twice the rate of Iowa's other rural counties overall with population decline. So this story really reaches across the country. When industry takes over towns, they absolutely hollow out rural resources, and it's really devastating to people that live there.
I think this is especially important because there's the trope that an industry moving into town is good for the town because it's good for the economy. Like the narrative that, all this activist stuff aside, we need Tyson and we need Smithfield Foods. But when you examine the places where the industries are based, you begin to see how they're not even good for local economies, especially in the long term. The COVID pandemic has also highlighted how devastating and broken this system is. Here's Maria.
If you can remember, there was a supply chain, right, that broke. So literally, we had farmers that had birds that could not get them to processing, right? So you had some where they were depopulating, they call it, the houses. In other words, turning off the fans, and the birds would because they couldn't get them to the processing plants. The processing plants, you had workers that were essential, so they had to go to work. They were getting sick. It was quite a mess. It was quite a mess. Organizing at that point, because it is so much infrastructure, okay? Like I talk about the poultry houses, the processing plants, there's just a lot of infrastructure. And because of that, like when things go wrong, it goes wrong throughout the entire chain.
Through the Defense Production Act on April 28, 2020, Donald Trump ordered meat processing plants to stay open, and the USDA even approved requests for poultry processing plants, including ones owned by Mount Air and Tyson, to increase their line speeds above the federal limit, raising the number of employees needed on the line and so making them stand closer together, further risking their lives. Authors of the article, The Southern Model Revisited, explain that, quote, because poultry processing is overrepresented by racial and ethnic minorities, immigrants, and refugees, the executive order represented a strong base of anti-working class racism. In the South in general, and the poultry industry in particular, the devastating consequences of COVID are the result of the long-standing destructive dominance of the plantation bloc and racial capitalism, where a disproportionate number of deaths were concentrated in southern states, end quote. Despite tens of thousands of workers testing positive and workers dying from COVID, processing plants in partnership with the U.S. government continued to deny line workers sick leave or hazard pay, often tested for fever instead of COVID to ignore asymptomatic cases, and forced employees to work at faster line speeds. Meat producers were given immunity from being sued for spreading COVID in their plants, and were doing all sorts of exploitative things, like Tyson offering $500 to $600 bonuses to get people to come to work who wouldn't otherwise, which at this time meant because they were sick or they wanted to avoid risking their or their families' lives. In the article, COVID lays bare the brittleness of a concentrated and consolidated food system. Mary Kay Hendrickson writes that, quote, worker treatment, farmer viability, animal welfare, and ecological sustainability were all pressing concerns prior to this moment. The pandemic glaringly illuminates that just-in-time food supply chains lack the resilience to effectively respond to such a severe, multidimensional shock. This system has shown little capacity to fend off disruption, difficulty in stretching to accommodate change, and little redundancy or overlapping systems that provide fail-safe mechanisms. It has highlighted the lack of diversity in scale, form, and organization across the system, end quote.
I was kind of very glad to see that the family farms, they were able to adjust themselves, right? So that they still had food for their community and to feed the community. With the system, with the efficiency, they could not do that. So they had empty shelves on the grocery stores, and people were starting to go back to the family farmer, right, to buy meat. So it was really interesting to see how the systems react to something.
Authors of Community Health and Socioeconomic Issues Surrounding Concentrated Animal Feeding Operations point out that how industrialized agriculture impacts communities has been studied in California and Illinois and Iowa and Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota, and the list goes on. And, quoting from the article, these findings consistently show that the social and economic well-being of local rural communities benefits from increasing the number of farmers, not simply increasing the volume of commodity produced. End quote. In another article called The Community Effects of Industrialized Farming, published in the journal Agriculture and Human Values, the authors examine 51 empirical studies of industrialized farming at large's impact on communities since the 1930s, and 82% of the studies found detrimental impacts on communities. Some of these impacts include greater income inequality, higher unemployment rates, social structures becoming poorer, decline in population size where family farms are replaced by industrialized farms, increase in general stress and social psychological problems, deterioration of neighborly relations, deterioration in community organizations and involvement in social life, fewer and reduced quality in public services, deterioration of landscape, declines in real estate values, depletion of water, air quality problems, increased risk of nutrient overload in soils, and reports of respiratory, digestive, and eye health issues. And there's a lot more from the study, too. People living around intensive industrial agriculture experiencing these negative impacts are also paying for them. There's the tax money you pay to upkeep public infrastructure that the industry's trucks degrade, to carry out public health initiatives for illnesses that the industry puts people at risk of, to clean up pollution that the industry produces. There's the cost of climate change impacts that animal ag is a contributor to, And there's all of the government contracts, subsidies, and incentives for these agribusiness companies that the public pays for too. The American Public Health Association calculates that it all ends up being billions of dollars on the public's back. And if you live in these areas with higher risks of illness and you do get sick, then you also have medical bills to pay. Because in the US, your taxes subsidize corporate wealth instead of paying for you and your fellow neighbors' healthcare. All of this stuff is connected. I asked Dr. Thurka Sangaramoorthy from episode 1 to speak more on the jobs and quality of life that these large-scale animal ag industries offer people living and working in rural areas. In your book, Landscapes of Care, there's a section called It's Like a Slavery Job, but You Get Paid for It, Industrial Poultry Processing and Haitians. Could you explain what you learned that resulted in this section of the book and what you see as the root causes and ways of thinking that lead to this systematic exploitation of people?
It's essentially a total system. It's a total system, meaning that everything operates within that system. There's really no sort of outside intervention, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Haitians are very, very, very particular about how much the mistreatment is, the fact that they are completely dehumanized, that they're just a body doing this work. You do get paid for it, but it doesn't make it any less. It doesn't make it any less feel like it's not slavery. That where it's you know, their movement is controlled. There's very little room for mistakes. They don't have a lot of freedom, and they can be easily replaced. And so these are all the ways that they feel like there's very little sort of free choice, that they're just essentially a body. They're getting verbally abused. They're being highly controlled, and they're experiencing injuries, right? Purposefully, because it's not anything that really allows for people to feel safe in what they're doing. And so food production is entirely about profit and efficiency. It's not about people, right? It's not about people. It draws energy and resources from people, but that's just to sort of make more capital. It's not something that actually kind of goes back to the people. Most of these people can't even afford food, right? They just can't. And so they're paid poorly, and there's such a surplus labor force that they can be easily replaced. So it's one of those things that it's very, like, I think if you want to read Marx and Capital, this is essentially what it sort of looks like. That is food production. Like, we're so removed from how food is produced in this country, right? We go to the grocery store, we pick out, a packet of chicken legs or thighs, or beef cutlets or whatever, and we don't think about, how did that get there? Like, what does it look like? Who is feeding us? There are very few people that really think about this, right? Who is feeding us? There's also like an incredible amount of harm in how produce is, like, and vegetables and fruits are actually sort of processed. And so there's harm in food in general. And it's just something that we've been so dissociated from. And that is intentional. That is absolutely intentional. And so we don't think about it. It's not even a thought that comes into our mind, right? It's just that and then the workers themselves are also alienated from the means of their production, right? That is overwhelming, because how do we change that, right? How do we change that? We're going to have to do something drastically different. And no one is profiting from this except for the companies. No one. And yeah, you might feel good about finding cheap meat or vegetables, but there's a lot of collateral damage in that. And I don't know how many of us are willing to really sort of change that, right? It's a system that keeps us all down, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and there's like sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, most of us, our salaries are not keeping up with inflation. We can barely afford to live here, right? And so of course, I check prices myself. I am trying to also save money and get by. And so it's a tormented cycle.
Yeah, I mean, so like what I was going to say just then was there's also just so many people that cannot, like, we say, like, oh, this at least this industry gives you cheap meat at the grocery store. Like, so many people cannot afford Tyson meat.
No.
It's not really
No.
cheap. And also then you have to think about everything else that goes into making it the price that it even is. This piece is really important because a common narrative used to justify the dominant food system is that it feeds the world. It's the idea that we can't stop producing food in this way because this is the only way to feed billions of people. I asked Craig, the farmer from episode 2, about what he thought about this argument during our conversation.
We're feeding the world is definitely a misconception. We're feeding the people who are affluent enough to buy the product. We're not feeding everybody on my road out here. There's food insecure kids right on Butler Road here in Fairmont. So we're not even feeding our communities, much less the world. So that's just not so.
The United Nations report, The State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World 2023, found that 29.6% of the world's population, that's about 2.4 billion people, were moderately or severely food insecure in 2022. In the article, The Enduring Fantasy of Feeding the World, authors Adam Callow, Maiwa Montenegro, Alistair Isles, and Ben Giuliano examine the assertion that industrial agriculture is the needed food system to feed the world. They write that, quote, the core premise of this discourse is that the caloric needs of a growing population necessitate an agriculture oriented around ever-increasing yields. In this productivist frame, the remedy for global hunger is greater output, cheaper crops, and cheaper food, end quote. Meanwhile, they explain that, quote, yet, as critics have repeatedly shown, there is no global stomach to which to deliver calories and no simple association between yield rates and food security. Rather, hungry people access food through specific politics of distribution, rather than an anonymous global grain warehouse as the trope implies. In fact, increased productivity accounts for only a small share of hunger reduction. Reducing malnutrition is more strongly associated with social and institutional factors, such as improved access to clean water, sanitation, and gender equitable education, end quote. So, hunger is largely a distribution problem, often related to power and politics. For example, in December of 2021, under the Biden administration, the United Nations General Assembly voted on a resolution to make food a human right. And which two countries were the only ones to vote against it? The US of A and Israel. These two countries won't even vote for food to be counted as part of a liberal construction that, more often than not, frankly, functions to prevent providing people with what they need rather than building societies that support people and reciprocity with nature. Reconciling their UN votes with the starvation and mass death to the scale of genocide that the US and Israel have and are still causing in Palestine, I think it becomes clear how a country's favored food system is a wide open window into the priorities and goals of its leadership. At its core, industrialized agriculture's productivist obsession and dishonest feed the world justification is, quoting from the same Spectre article, from the old colonial capitalist roots of economic and epistemic domination, a hubristic faith in progress, the patronization of a distant other in need of aid, and the justification of colonial control over land and labor, end quote. It also plays into this idea of land sparing, which falsely positions intensive industrialized agriculture as sustainable and good for the climate, claiming that technology producing higher quantities of food in smaller and smaller spaces would hypothetically free up more land for untouched preserves or carbon offsetting, which are other fundamentally flawed greenwash policies that amount to land grabbing and business as usual for polluting corporations. Also, land sparing doesn't usually account for the monoculture farm fields growing feed for the animals, the factory infrastructure, the large quantities of fresh water taken up by factory operations, and all of the pollution and waste generated that has to go somewhere. The idea of land sparing also denies the interdependence we have with our environments, and denies people of culture and place-based food systems. It ignores the deterioration and pollution of rural communities, rural economies, and ecosystems that is seen over and over again when factory farm systems concentrate in an area. It promotes a food system devoid of biodiversity, and biodiversity is something that plants and animals, including people, as we are animals, need to survive. The big integrators can mass produce chicken and add up to the 30 to 40% of food in the US that's produced yet goes wasted. But they are unlikely to distribute food equitably, support farmer and worker-owned food production, and make food in a way that is resilient and healthy for people and Earth for future generations. Industry propaganda like Tyson's tagline, "We feed the world like family," parades a falsity and further entrenches us in a food system that makes people living and working near the operation sick, abandons farmers to mounting debt, degrades environments, treats animals cruelly, and yet still leaves many people hungry. At the end of the day, higher yields do not simply equal more fed people, and better agriculture systems do exist. I also asked Monica about her perspectives on root causes. What do you see as the root causes of these issues that manifest in industrial agriculture?
It's this idea that when you're in a rural, I think some of it is this. When you're in a rural community, you have less population, you have more interaction with people, you have more likelihood of, knowing more people personally. It's not 6 degrees of separation, or maybe like 2. So we went to school together, my kids know you married your son married my daughter. There's this connectivity that happens. And with that, I believe it breeds a sort of community. We're all in this together. We take care of each other. We don't want to cause problems for one another. And so even if we have a certain concern, we give the benefit of the doubt because we don't look at them as an industry. We just look at them as farming. And so the perspective that we have said, this is industry, it's industrial, it's no longer just agriculture. It's not just a farm, it's industrial. You no longer have several people working the farm. You may have 1 or 2 because everything's automated. So the perspective needs to change, and the acknowledgement of the evolution of this industry needs to be acknowledged. And we also need to be able to say, listen, I can say that you need to fix this and this and this, and you should make these changes for the greater good, and still not say, well, you hate me because you want to highlight certain things that can cause danger. And any parent who, because we have high rates of asthma here, especially in kids, nobody here wants to expose their kids to more things that can harm them. And you think we're just going to take that lying down? So it's a perspective change. And I think we have done a lot to change that view. People are no longer just thinking we're just attacking the industry. They're actually now going, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Right.
Yeah.
So it's a different view. And so I think that perspective. And then, of course, they have a huge lobby group. Delmarva, what did they change their name to? Delmarva
Chicken Association.
Chicken Association. It used to be Delmarva Poultry Industry, the Chicken Association. And they come every time we go to Annapolis, there they are. And they were the main ones that blocked us in our Community Healthy Air Act. And, when I asked point blank to the president, I said, what would you do as an industry if it's proven that these things are contaminating the air, that they're causing harm? Well, we don't have that data, so we can't. I said, the data is out there.
Yeah.
The data is out there. They were just saying, oh, we don't have Salisbury data, which is absolutely silly. But I said, but what if? What would you be willing to do? Well, we don't have the data. So that is the that's the roundabout way that they go to prevent doing the right thing.
Yeah. They don't
And now
care
there's
about doing the
all
right
these
thing.
lawsuits. There's lawsuits up the wazoo. And it doesn't have to be that way.
We have one more episode and one more topic to cover. Here's Gabby reflecting on her past and introducing what she's concerned about looking toward the future.
So I will say I was very naive in the beginning. I had absolutely no idea what we were up against. I was completely unaware of being an environmental activist meant, the things that I would endure, the people I would meet, the enemies I would make. You know, it's definitely not for the faint of heart. I would say you really need to be a strong-willed person. And at that point, you know, I realized that this issue was way bigger than just our little tiny neighborhood fighting this massive CAFO. Little did we know that they were prepping this area for much more than what any of us back in 2015 to 2018 could have ever imagined. We just thought like, oh my God, the industry is just coming in and pushing the little guy out. It was so much bigger than that. We had no idea until maybe a couple of years ago what they were actually doing. And what they were doing is creating farms so big that not only does it take the little people out who can't keep up with the amount of upgrades and, you know, regulations, but creating waste. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is biorefineries, anaerobic digesters popping up all over the shore. Huge amounts of money, taxpayer dollars, getting funded to out-of-state investors, out-of-county investors, coming in and trying to, quote-unquote, solve the chicken waste problem.